Well, thank you everybody for being here. My name is Steve Catanach. I'm the Director of Electric Utility Development for the city, and appreciate you all taking this time and come by, visit, learn about where we're currently at with the formation of a municipal utility, and also we have just successfully moved some agreements with Xcel forward, and Tom Carr will be here talking about those agreements. But first, I wanted to give a brief update on where we are with our efforts in developing costs and information to support the decision you all will be making in 2020, whether to move forward with the formation of a municipal utility. So our agenda for tonight is I'll give my brief overview, which I just did, a project update, and then we'll turn it over to Tom to talk about the agreements we have with Xcel. Then Ben Irwin will be talking about our communications and engagement plan that we recently published. So part of the reason we're doing this is we really have a set of 4 fundamental goals that we're trying to work into as we move forward with municipalization. And this really has to do with making sure that we're developing opportunity for clean electric supply, that we have local control. We have an opportunity. I was just visiting with Nils about a project he's has in mind, and he's having to go to California to test the work he's doing, which if we had that level of local control with our electric utility, that may be an opportunity for something that we could test here. We want to ensure we're providing value. Certainly, many of you have heard my background, and I was the director of Fort Collins Utility. I've actually spent a good part of my career involved with municipal utilities. And one thing I can honestly say is they bring value to the communities that they operate in, not only because they bring revenue to the community, but also because they support the values of the local citizens. And of course, we want to ensure that it's a reliable and it's a safe electric system. That is certainly the responsibility of any electric utility, and that's our goal. But bottom line is we have a series of goals that we're trying to support, and those are goals to reduce emissions, to clean our electricity supply, all of this in order to help address the issues of climate change. So a quick update on where we are with the project. As you all saw, the Colorado PUC approved Xcel's Clean Power Plan. And certainly we have some expertise here in the room with Deb Kalish, and that has worked on that case. But fundamentally, this is a good thing. We're removing some coal from our system. We're adding more renewables. Xcel is doing that. But it doesn't get us to our goal. It gets us part of the way there. So as I've discussed before, what we're working on to move forward with our go, no-go decision is we are working to develop the cost of buying the system, acquiring those assets. We are working to identify the cost of separating what is a integrated electric system into 2 independent systems. And we're looking at the costs of standing up the utility, how we will go about operating that utility, which is basically line crews, meter readers, warehousing, materials, all the things that go into day-to-day operations. And we're looking at our power supply. On the engineering front, we have brought on board a engineering company, NEI Engineering, out of Denver, who will be working with us on the separation of the distribution system. And currently we have had our kickoff meeting and are moving forward with detailed engineering, all with the goal of moving that forward, going out to bid, and determining the cost of constructing the city's portion of the separation plan. If you all recall, here is a drawing, and the different colors are feeders in the system. The gray is inside city limits, and what is white is outside city limits, and Xcel will continue to serve those customers outside city limits. Our separation plan calls for a series of construction in order to create those two different systems. So in the end, this will be the city system after separation, only serving those customers within the city limits of Boulder.
Could you flash that back for a second?
To there?
Yeah. And,
So that's what
yeah.
Boulder will look like, and this is what the Xcel system will look like. So as I noted, we're moving forward with the acquisition of the system. We will enter into good faith negotiations with Xcel for the purchase of the assets, and if we don't reach an agreement, then we will move forward with condemnation. The time frame for that is here the third quarter of this year, and we anticipate condemnation will be done near the end of 2019, should we have to go that route.
Could you please explain the difference between, I didn't exactly understand, you're in negotiation, but we might have to go to condemnation.
We,
Explain that.
we will enter good faith negotiations to buy the system. If that fails, then we will move forward with condemnation.
And so could someone define that, and, because I never quite got this distinction.
So I'm going to cover that in my presentation.
Tom's going to cover that in his presentation.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yep. Transition planning, we're planning on issuing a series of RFPs. We had previously done this. The city has a process called Request for Qualifications. Here, 2 or 3 years ago, the city issued RFQs, those are called, and interviewed companies that run electric utilities as a contractor, that provide customer service, call center, billing, all of the functions of the utility. So what we will do is in 2019, we will refresh all of those requests in order to understand what the cost will be to hire those folks to come in and help us run the utility as we transition to the city running the utility. We also have a lot of IT work that we'll have to do as we move forward, and we also plan that from the end of this year all the way through 2020 when we move to the vote. We also have had a plan for our power supply that we titled as a gradual departure from the Xcel system. And the idea with this gradual departure plan was, as Xcel needed new energy resources, the city instead would go out and they would acquire those new resources through market purchases and contracts. This was a way of avoiding stranded costs. And stranded costs are those costs that Xcel has invested in order to support the city of Boulder, that with the city of Boulder leaving, they no longer are being paid for by the city of Boulder. But one of the things we're seeing is the price of renewables in the market right now is extremely low. So we just think it is prudent to go out, look at those prices, and along with that, try and identify what our stranded cost risk may be, because it may still be economically advantageous for us to take that step as opposed to the gradual departure plan. So we currently have a request for indicative pricing out on the market, and I think we anticipate responses to that here in the next 6 weeks or so. In our time frame, most of this, we are hoping to have these costs identified by the end of the first quarter in 2020, with the idea that that gives us time then to communicate to you what those costs are as we move to the vote in November of 2020, and then spend some time actually helping paint a clear picture of what we're proposing to do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about the real reason we're here, and that's to update on the Xcel agreements.
Well, it's a part of a bigger picture. So, good afternoon. My name's Tom Carr. I'm the city attorney for the city of Boulder, and I've been sort of the lead on negotiating these agreements with Kathy Haddock and Deb Kalish doing most of the heavy lifting. So if you have problems, talk to me. You've got to say nice things, talk to them. So the reason we're doing these agreements is the commission ordered us to. So you may remember that the Public Utilities Commission said that the city had to get permission from the Public Utilities Commission to transfer the assets in the city, that is the electrical distribution system, from Xcel to the city. In September of 2017, the commission issued an order conditionally granting the transfer of the assets outside of the substations. So that's what we're talking about, is the transfer of the assets outside of the substations. They put 3 conditions, which are up on the board. The city would do a revised list of assets. We're not going to talk about that tonight other than to say it's in process, and we are required to file that with the commission by October 26th. The complication has been that Xcel's system is fairly old, and the property rights are not as clear as one would hope you would have today. So a system that's been built over a period of 100 years, you're going to get property rights that perhaps are not as formal. And before GIS mapping, location of facilities can also be challenging. We actually have what we think is a pretty final list of the actual physical assets. What we're really working on now is the property rights that accompany those assets and which ones we have to transfer and even finding them. So we're working on that. So the other things that we're required to do was an agreement that would provide permanent property rights for the Xcel facilities that are going to remain in Boulder after the transition, that is after the separation. And I'll show you the map that Steve just showed you again to sort of put that in context in a minute. And the last thing was, a lot of the interveners focused on the need not to impose Boulder's costs of municipalization on other ratepayers around the state. So the commission ordered us to enter into an agreement through which the city would agree to pay Xcel's costs, because of course all of Xcel's costs are charged to ratepayers, and the ratepayers throughout the state would pay. These are agreements that we were required to do. The original requirement was within 90 days. We're going to make it under a year. They're a lot more complicated than anybody thought. This is unplowed ground in so many ways. We've negotiated seriously for a full year to get to this point. And I will tell you, it was not simple. And you can find the council packets online. It's 75 pages long. The agreements are in there. Anybody who can't sleep at night can go ahead and try to read them and get through them. So Steve talked about the bigger plan and how we're working through step by step. The agreements are a part of that. They provide sort of the legal framework to get through that. So remember, the goal is that in November 2020, the voters in the city of Boulder will one more time go and tell us whether or not they go forward. This time, our goal is to give them an accurate representation of the total cost that this is going to be. So those costs are listed up there. The acquisition of the assets. The cost that we're going to have to contrust 2 separate operating systems, and those costs are for costs both inside and outside of substations. The transfer of Boulder customers from Xcel to Boulder Power and Light. Any additional costs that Xcel is going to have, and then the source and cost of power supply. Steve mentioned that we're working on indicative pricing for power. Power is one of the biggest, actually the biggest expense for any electric utility. So having some idea of what that's going to cost is crucial for the voters to make an informed decision. And then the last piece is stranded costs. And you see it says up there, projected stranded costs, if any. We're going to try to make a good faith estimate of what those stranded costs will be. Stranded costs are a term of art. Back some time ago, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued an order that was a compromise. The order said that if someone departs an electrical system and still wants to use the transmission system, and it was part of a docket where they were talking about whether the transmission system had to be freely available to everybody. The electric company said, well, we built the system. We also built generating assets expecting to serve these people. So the commission said, as a condition of being able to use those transmission assets, you have to pay for any generating costs that are stranded, that they can no longer, that were built in anticipation of serving the customers who are now leaving. So that's what stranded costs are. Now, I say if any, because the commission has also said that there's several ways to avoid stranded costs. One, by continuing to purchase power from the utility you're departing, because then you're still using the generating asset. And two, by not using the transmission assets, because they're conditioned on using the transmission. So if you find another way to get electricity, you don't have to pay stranded costs. We're not sure, and our original plan, one of the plans we had, was to step down the use of Xcel's power and gradually depart so that we could not impact the generation system. But it turns out that the cost of renewables has dropped so substantially that it may be actually cheaper to just depart immediately and go to renewables and still pay the stranded costs. So our team is analyzing the various options, and by the time you all go to the ballot in November of 2020, we hope we will have some better idea about how to do that and where the numbers are. And one of the challenges in this area is the pricing on renewables is changing so rapidly that just keeping pace with it, we change year to year. Yes?
So stranded costs has to do with generating capacity, not infrastructure.
That's correct.
Okay.
So they built a power plant expecting to serve Boulder customers. They're saying, well, we can't use that power. Of course, we say that's not true. You can use the power. The native load is growing, but that's an argument we can have a different day.
One quick question also.
Yeah.
So has Xcel, in the 8 years that we've been working on this, has Xcel been deprived by the PUC from establishing any more growth of its power supply to
No.
entities?
No, they do the electric resource plan and they purchased more power.
And do we know, like, how much that would be? Because for 8 years, they've known we're gonna.
Well, they take the position,
Does that count?
Lynn, I've had this argument with them several times. They take the position that until we actually tell them we're departing, we're not a departing customer. And the commission has actually joined us with that. Patrick?
Yeah, the stranded cost is kind of a double-edged sword, and I don't think you're giving us the other edge of the sword.
Patrick, is this a question or a comment?
It's going to be a question.
Well, you're not gotten there yet, but.
What is the number of years we would have to take electricity from Xcel, thus delaying our ability to use renewables?
So we projected that at various, we've projected that at various numbers, and you've seen those numbers. And it varies depending on how you calculate the usage and the potential stranded costs. We're not there yet. We've estimated about 10 years, but we've also estimated 7. And as I just said, if you were listening, that the cost of renewables has dropped so drastically, we may just decide to pay stranded costs and it be cheaper than buying Xcel's energy, which is expensive. Patrick, we have a very limited time here, so I'm not going to really argue with you. I'm here to present material. Now, well, we'll have questions at the end.
Do you realize that you have to fit
So the property rights agreement,
acquisition and stranded into the $214 million?
that's not true. And
That's
so,
what it says, like,
so, Patrick, I know you oppose the program, and I appreciate that and I respect that. My job is to provide everybody else in the room with an explanation of these agreements. The charter section has very little to do with these agreements. That'll be a debate for another day, which you can have in November of 2020 when you go to the ballot with everyone else. Is that okay? Thank you. So property rights.
is to find out the details and if they have changed. And also, we had a meeting.
So everyone, if everyone is okay with Patrick talking like this, tell me, and we can just go. But I mean, we have until 6:30, and we've all heard I hear your representations almost every week. It's just not my point here to engage. So thank you. Property rights agreements. So the first agreement that we need to have is an agreement to have permanent, non-exclusive easements for all facilities that Xcel will have in the system that will serve out-of-city customers after the separation. The city's charter doesn't allow for non-exclusive easements permanent non-exclusive easements in the right-of-way. So we're going to have to ask the voters in November of 2020 to make a decision about whether or not to amend the charter to allow that. Nothing in the agreement gives Xcel any rights unless separation is approved, unless the voters vote yes in November of 2020. So the agreement is all conditioned on that. An important thing to remember, right now, under, well, used to be under the franchise, under the way we operate with Xcel now without a franchise, is if they have a line in the street and they have to move it, they pay the relocation costs. Under this agreement, the city would have to pay those relocation costs. So this is a big change for the existing, from the existing system. Another thing that's not on the slide that I've been asked a couple of times is, what happens if Xcel abandons a facility or they stop using it? And the answer is, or they decide to sell. The answer is that under this agreement, they lose the easement. The easement is conditioned on them continuing to use the property, that property right to serve customers outside of the city. So you saw this slide before. This is Xcel's system today. And this is what this is a high-level schematic diagram. And one of the things I'll talk about a little bit is we're doing more detailed design. But this is a high-level schematic diagram of how it will look later. So when we talk about these property rights, we're not talking, we're not talking about the current system. That would be a lot of property rights. We're talking about this. So we're talking about, yes?
Since over the years, I've made many, many maps just like that. Just a suggestion to whoever's on the GIS staff doing this, it would really be worthwhile, and you do have the space to have a key in there where you can say this color represents this. Something
Yeah,
similar.
so there's a reason why we don't do that. Those are feeder lines, and we don't want you to know what feeds what.
Look at that CII stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, they're colorful, and they're pretty, but you can just, the important thing is the service. It's not indicating any substantive thing other than the fact that they're feeders.
Put down, frame like a dumbed-down version of it, which
Yeah.
utilities do already.
So Tom, to your point.
Yeah.
If they vacate their easement, right, then does that give the city a better avenue to acquire?
No,
What
so
happens?
remember, this is all after acquisition. They only get these easements after we vote to go ahead. So it doesn't affect acquisition at all. So these are property rights that they will have after separation, that is, so after we completely build out the two systems. Okay, let's skip 2. So some of the details. Xcel would have broad rights to work within the easements, including the right to manage vegetation, so they'd be able to cut down trees if they needed to. The easements would run with the land. That's a legal term to mean that they're not personal to the company. They would be recorded as deeds on the land. Anybody who looked it up would see that the easement was there. The city would record the easement, and we would purchase title insurance for Xcel to the extent that insurance is possible. We're not sure you can get title insurance for an easement in a public right-of-way. Xcel would not be able to interfere with the city's use of streets, parks, or open space, and the current easements in open space will be amended to shift the burden of paying costs for relocation. So they do have some permanently. Remember, I used some lawyer words, and I apologize for that. I said this agreement affects easements in the public right-of-way. Parks and open space are not public right-of-way, so we can and have given easements in there in the past. But those easements currently provide for us to pay, the city to pay, for Xcel to pay the cost of relocation. In the future, that would shift, just as with all the other ones. So the cost reimbursement agreement is the second agreement we're going to ask council to approve. The underlying principle is that the cost of municipalization should not be imposed on any other ratepayer in the state. These are the lists of costs that we're intending to pay, and you can see them there. We've been already paying their costs for negotiating the agreements, and I'll tell you about that in a second. The one thing that's important is that we're not required to pay for their legal costs that they expend challenging us. So they have to pay those. And we argued over that for a bit, but it doesn't seem fair that we would be paying to encourage them to sue us. And that's in the agreement. Yes, sir.
Does number 6 include construction of any new substations?
No. So I'll get to substations at the end. This agreement covers only distribution assets outside of the substations. We expect that it would be similar for substations, but we were only ordered to have an agreement for outside the substations. And I'll get to an update on the substations in a second at the end of this presentation to tell you where we are. The interim cost agreement. So one of the things that we negotiated early on was a process to go forward because we did not want to stop all of the work while we were negotiating the agreement. So we entered into an interim cost agreement. So far, the city has paid $468,354.56 under that agreement. That's all we have billed so far. That covers the costs of negotiating these agreements and some of the work in preparing what are called scopes of work, which I'll talk about in a second. We are working on the scopes of work. The second is here. The scopes of work are Xcel's process for doing detailed design drawings. So they sit down and scope out the work formally before they enter into the process of doing detailed design drawings. So that had to happen first. Those are complete. The agreement provides that, the cost agreement provides, that once they complete those, they have to give them to us, and we get 30 days to review and comment, and then they become final. And then they have to begin a process of doing the detailed design drawings. They have given them to us in not the correct format, not the full format yet, so we haven't formally received them, have we? So as of Friday, we hadn't formally received them. So we've gotten an early look. They're looking fine. We will have 30 days to once they get them to us in a readable format. We have them in PDFs, and we want them in sort of in some other system. That's engineer stuff. That's beyond my knowledge. The city has hired an engineering company to do detailed design drawings. So what this means is the goal is to provide the voters with a view on how much it's going to cost to physically separate the system. That's construction work. To do construction work, you need a detailed design. So to do the detailed design, you need the scope of work. First phase of that scope of works is pretty much done. We then, once we sign off on those scopes of work, we enter the next phase where both Xcel, with their engineers, and the city, with our engineering company, will start doing the detailed design work necessary to construct the two separate systems. Now, usually you do that right before you begin construction, but we're doing this in a two-step process. Our goal is to get a number for you, and the only way to do that is to know actually how we're going to build these things. And so we're on that process.
So that first part was a concept design, the $468,000 that we paid Xcel.
Yeah, actually, it's a lot of it's lawyers' fees for negotiating these agreements. Acquisition. So this is, I'll get to Julie's question. So in Colorado and in virtually the whole Western world, the government has a right to take any property it needs for the public good. That right is called the right of eminent domain. It means that the king has the right to take things. The only constraint on that is there has to be due process, and the government has to pay fair market value for it. So in Colorado, there's some constraints around that for the government. Before we can exercise that power of eminent domain and go into court and take somebody's property, the law requires that we sit down with them and negotiate. We have to negotiate in good faith, or it's a condition of filing the complaint. So the court, they could move to dismiss a complaint if we don't honor the right to negotiate in good faith. So before we can negotiate in good faith, we have to have an appraisal for what the system's worth. So we did an appraisal a few years ago, but appraisals get stale, so we're doing another one right now. We have our appraisers out appraising Xcel system so we can get a number so that we can begin good faith negotiations in December. So that's our goal. Yes, sir?
Is the reappraisal required because the system is aged or because of new market valuation?
Both. And generally any appraisal is stale after about 6 months. You just wouldn't do it. And this is such a big deal, a big project. We'd hate to have somebody say, well, you didn't enter into good faith negotiations because your appraisal was 3 years old. So, and our prior appraisal included the transmission loop that runs through the city, and so we're not taking that now. That was a big component of it. So it's better that we redo it anyway. So we're in the process of redoing it. So we're hoping to get the good faith negotiations completed by early 2019 and go to condemnation sometime in 2019. Our goal is to have a number for acquisition of assets by the end of 2019. Yeah, Julie.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Is it possible that negotiations could come to a conclusion that would nullify the need for condemnation?
So, yes, but not likely. So, and I'll explain why. I mean, I've got this on a later slide, but I'll explain it now. We have a dispute with Xcel about the scope of the compensation. That we've talked to them, and it's a legal dispute. It has to do with the question of whether we owe lost profits for the period of time, for some period of time after we take their equipment. And they say that we do. They call it going concern damages. We say that we don't. There's no precedent for it in Colorado law. They have an argument, we have an argument. It's a big number, so we can't settle it. There's no halfway on this, at least so far as I've seen. And you may remember when we last April 2017, we suggested a buyout option to council that Xcel had proposed, or we put it in front of council, which council rejected. The number there was between $250 and $300 million for going conserve damages. So it's a significant number. We weren't able to take it off the table in those negotiations, so I don't know that we'll be able to take it off the table in the good faith negotiations. But yes. But well, it's part of, it would be part of a condemnation judgment, so it's one of the reasons we can't really settle it.
Is there a precedent for the going concern settlement in other states?
I think there are a couple of states, but not many.
Yeah, different states handle it different ways, and they have laws specifying it.
Oh.
We're silent on it, and all the courts have said, no, to going concern.
Couldn't we
Where they had
countersue?
legislation that.
All the Colorado courts.
So the question for those who can't hear it for the television, the question was, is there any precedent for it in other states? The answer is yes, but not a lot. There are some states that have statutes that cover it. There is a statute in Colorado that addresses the question of municipalization of assets of a cooperative electrical, and there is a going concern provision in that. Xcel has relied upon that in the past. We argue that since they put it there and they didn't give it to investor-owned utilities, that's evident, and that's generally a principle of law. So there are arguments on either side that I expect will have to be addressed in the courts.
Can you say that just a little slower? You were kind of slurring that last sentence.
So,
You mentioned a situation of a co-op
yes.
that's
So,
being municipalized, and in that case, I'm assuming you're talking case law here.
no. There's a statute. There's a statute in the Colorado statutes that provides for going concern damages to cooperative electric utilities in the case of municipalization. But there's no similar statute for investor-owned utilities.
Thank you.
That's my point. Yes. Well, in the back.
Yeah, so it sounds like you might be going to condemnation. So how does condemnation work when, like, the substations are out of the city?
Well,
You condemn.
the city, yeah. The city can condemn things outside the city.
Okay.
The Constitution specifically provides for that.
Okay.
Lynn?
Mine was, couldn't we provide that we should have some profit as individuals, or as a city ourselves?
It's a good argument. We'll see what arguments we can make.
If they can have profit,
Yeah.
then fair's
Well,
fair.
all right. So the cost agreement is divided up into phases. So, and the big touchstone for us is go, no go. That's the November 2020 election. So our job is to get the voters a number that they can rely upon at the November 2020 election. So the agreement divides it up. So the costs that are going to be incurred prior to go, no go are the scopes of work, which I've talked about and are pretty much done. Detailed design drawings, which is the engineering work to figure out where everything actually goes. Bid solicitation and selection. This is a very important thing. We went back and forth on this, and Xcel agreed that they will go out to bid for the contractor to do their separation work. They will do that after the detailed designs are completed. They expect 6 months to do that, and they expect to give us a number, the contract says they'll give us a number by May 1st of 2020. So the thing that we wanted here was having a third party say, I will do this for this amount. And the voters will have that to rely upon. The amount is likely to be high because you're talking about construction a few years in the future. So there's going to, any reasonable construction company is going to build in a significant contingency for cost increases. We expect that. So that will be part of the thing that you will all have to evaluate as voters when you look at this. But the important thing that we worked really hard to get was an agreement that they would go to a third party to do this and that we would have a real response to an RFP at the end of the day, and that we will have. And then we'll also pay administrative costs, including all the legal fees for negotiations out of these costs incurred before. So the big costs are the costs for separation. That is the physically constructing two separate systems. And so within 60 days after completing the detailed design, Xcel will we'll start this process to select a company to do the construction work. They will receive final bids within 6 months, and they'll give us the cost by 2020. So our goal is to have all of these numbers assembled in time for the election, but we're targeting May of 2020. This is one of the most important decisions that will be made in this generation for the city of Boulder. We want the community to have as much time as possible to go through and discuss these numbers. So we will have a full public debate on this prior to the election, prior to even us drafting the ballot measures. So the idea is that, and Xcel cooperated with giving us numbers. Actually, they said they said June 1st, we said April 1st, and I don't know how we got to May 1st. Yeah.
So Tom, history of the muni has been one of missing deadlines. I think many people in the room will agree to that. So we have some deadlines for some numbers, and those numbers are going to be necessary so the voters can vote in 2020. What happens if either the numbers are really bad or deadlines aren't met? Let's face it, this is the history of the muni.
So I would say that the history of the muni has been a multi-million-dollar company opposing us at every step of the way, and us having to do that. So,
You're deflecting the question.
no, I'm answering the question.
Right.
So Xcel is bound by contract to give us these numbers. I mean, there are ways out, and there are things,
So
but,
the contract to give numbers.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
And regardless of the numbers, so if they throw in numbers that totally blow the $214 million limit out of the water, is that what the voters are going to see?
well, the voters will see the numbers we get.
Got it. Thank you.
They have to produce.
Yeah. Ma'am, did you have a question?
Question about the numbers. Is it legally possible for Xcel to give some numbers in 2020 dollars with the full information given to voters that they will be adjusted to inflation by the time it's really?
So it depends on which number you're talking about. As I said, a contract for a construction company to build something in 2022 or 2023 or 2024, for that matter, is probably going to have contingencies in it that account for inflation, or an inflation escalator. I can't imagine a company bidding a fixed bid in $2020 without a huge contingency or an inflation. So that will be in there. Also with the power, I would expect that we haven't seen the responses to the results, or I haven't seen the requests for indicative pricing, but I would expect those also to have either an escalator or a 2023 estimate built in there. So the big numbers, and those are the two big ones, should have that in as part of it when we give them to the voters. Yes, sir.
Why is Xcel generating the numbers versus the city generating the numbers?
So that's one of the challenges. Xcel is building their own system that will serve their customers. They have been adamant that they get to do that. The commission supported that. So we can't estimate how much it's going to cost them to build their system. That's why they're estimating those numbers, and they're doing the contract, which we will have no say over. They have to do it commercially reasonable, but that's it. So actually, I shouldn't say that's it. They have to do it in the way they would normally do it. That's the constraint on them. So yeah, the numbers may. I guess. As I've said before, to be honest, the numbers are probably going to look high, and the voters will get to decide. We will tell the voters what the numbers are. Patrick.
Do you think you're going to be, if, you say you're probably going to go to condemnation?
Yes, sir.
Do you think condemnation can be completed by 2020?
Yes. That's what all of our lawyers tell us. I'm not a condemnation lawyer, but we have people on who do it. So acquisition cost, I've already talked about the condemnation process, and I've talked about the legal issue with going concern damages, so I'm just going to move ahead. I gave you most of this information in a prior slide. The key date is October 1st of 2019, when we should have the results from the detailed designs. So cutover costs. As we've gotten more into this, it's become clear that cutover is not a simple process. And actually, if you think it through, it's natural. So there are all these customers in Boulder. You can't just flip a switch and say, today you're on Boulder's system, yesterday you want Xcel's. It'll probably take weeks or months to shift over. So we're going to have costs incurred when Xcel is serving part of Boulder's system and Boulder's serving part of Boulder's system. So there will be costs associated with that, including some billing back and forth and sequencing of customers. So we're going to pay those costs. True-up costs. So this is was one of the harder things we had to negotiate. And the basic concept is simple. So we're going to do the condemnation in 2019. We're going to cut over sometime after 2020, probably 2022, 2023, 2024, whenever the construction is completed, and we vary on the estimates. We'll get a better idea on that length when we finish with the detailed design and with the engineering estimates. But so we do the condemnation in 2019. We have cutover, say, in 2023. The system isn't static. Xcel will have replaced poles and transformers, and there'll be weather, there'll be challenges. So we negotiated an agreement. So the commission said you have to have an agreement to pay what they called true-up costs. So those are the costs that are incurred for acquisition of assets that aren't necessarily included in the condemnation. But there's that last phrase: any other true-up costs at the cutover date not otherwise addressed by the condemnation court. So we actually spent a lot of time talking about what that meant and what was included in there. So here's how we worked out true-up costs. So certain capital costs in excess of $75,000 incurred between valuation and cutover date. And there's an aggregation provision. So for poles, if we don't have to pay if they replace one pole. If they replace enough to make $75,000, then we have to pay. Distribution assets outside substations that Xcel will no longer use. So these are kind of abandoned assets. So if they exceed more than $250,000, and they can also aggregate those. But it does not include routine operations and maintenance of existing facilities. The balance here is they should get paid for things that are capital investments, that are basically assets we're acquiring that we didn't pay for. On the other hand, they have a duty, because they're getting the rates, to service their customers, and service their customers means doing routine maintenance and repair. So we've tried to strike that balance in that paragraph of the agreement. Security. So this was a big deal for us. The Xcel generally gets either security or payment of 100% for anything people pay them for. They don't have to worry about being out there financing. The city pays its bills. So we have a AAA credit rating. We generally don't give security to anybody. So we had two very different approaches coming into this. What I mean by security is some guarantee that a bill will be paid. So we're talking about between $20 and $50 million to build the separation system for Xcel. So that's a lot of money to have out there, and their concern, as they've expressed it, is that for political reasons, the city could decide to stop and not pay a bill. And we're sovereign, and I mean, I don't know that we'd do that, but legally we probably could get away with that. So they want some assurance so that if they've spent money, they have a way to collect. So we went back and forth on this. Excuse me. We've sort of settled on two different operations. One is a letter of credit. A letter of credit is basically something a bank puts out there that says you can draw on this if you meet certain conditions. And in this case, the conditions would be that they sent a bill and we didn't pay it. That's it. So for prior to no-go, we will post a letter of credit for $1.7 million. And usually you pay between 1% and 3% for a letter of credit. So for those you math folks in there, that's starting at $170,000, is that right? 17,000. Yeah, I look to Steve, he can do math. I went to law school. Not huge amount, but not free. After no-go, when we're talking about separation, we're talking about bigger numbers. So say the $50 million project done over 4 years, that's $12.5 million on average spent a year that they don't want to be out. So a letter of credit to be posted for that amount at 1% to 3% is a significant amount of money. So we were very concerned about the city spending that money over 4 years. So we suggested a line of credit. So a line of credit the city can get, because of our credit rating, relatively inexpensively. You only pay a small fee for having it out there as long as you don't draw upon it. The city does not expect to not pay anything. So it would be far better for us to do a line of credit. Xcel's response was, well, if you want to do a line of credit, you have to give us an agreement with a bank that says exactly it's going to be the same as a letter of credit. But we can't really negotiate a line of credit with a bank that we're going to use in 5 years. So we came up with this formula that our preference is a line of credit, but the first thing in the agreement is a letter of credit. So we will post a letter of credit for the lesser of $12 million or 130% of the expected annual expenditure, whichever is less. So why that is sort of simple. Construction projects, I said $12.5 million a year over 4 years. That makes sense, except not in the world of construction. You probably have $20, $30 million in the first year because you're buying stuff, you're building, and you may only have 6 in the 4th year. And you don't want to have a $12 million letter of credit for a $6 million obligation. So we would have a $9 million, no, that's $7.5 million, something like that, $1 million letter of credit for that if it was only $6 million. So that would be the lesser of $12 million. So if it was $20 million, it would be $12 million. That would be flat. The difference is if we can produce an agreement with a bank that satisfies Xcel's conditions, then we could use the line of credit. And we put a bigger number in there to encourage them because essentially there's no marginal cost for us going up to $20 million, or there shouldn't be much. So it's a relatively small amount of money. Since we don't expect to use it, it would be better for us to use it that way. For true up and cutover, which should be smaller numbers, we'll have a letter of credit equal to 100% of the expected costs. I'm almost done. I know agreements are really exciting to lawyers, but probably not to all of you. So the disputes. The city can dispute clerical errors. Somebody puts a decimal point in the wrong spot in a bill, then we can say, no, that should be $10,000, not $100,000. And I have seen that. So especially in construction stuff, people make mistakes, and you've got to fix them. And then this last language, I'm going to read it because it's very important. This was something we spent months noodling over to try to get right. Any act, omission, or failure to act by Xcel in connection with the agreement that was intended to cause harm to, or was in reckless disregard of, or wanton indifference to the financial interests of Boulder. Does that sound like a lawyer wrote that? So here's what we were trying to get at. So Xcel promised that they would not gold plate this system, that they would do what they normally did. But they also took the position, not an unreasonable position, that this should be treated as if they were doing their own project. And if they make a mistake in their own project, they pay for it. And since this is our project they're doing for us, they think if they make a mistake, we should pay for it. And we came back with, well, what if you put up gold poles? Could you do that? And the answer is, under some of the formulations we had, yeah, they probably could. So this language prevents the gold poles and things like that. And that's the limit of, and this is important as you evaluate these agreements, that is the limit of our constraint on Xcel's ability to spend money. And so, and as that's it. And it's, again, it's written by lawyers, to be read by lawyers. What it basically says is they can't willfully run up the costs. And if we can prove it, yes.
So this is probably more one for Steve. So you mentioned gold poles. So what if, Xcel wants to build a more expensive steel pole, and the city says, hey, we can get by with a wooden pole?
So we tried to address that in the agreement. We basically say they have to do what they normally do. And we use fancy language for that, but we tried to use a basic good utility practice standard, but they say, sometimes we exceed the good utility practice standards. That's fair. So basically, if they usually would put a wooden pole in this spot, they have to put a wooden pole in. If they have a reason why they would normally put a steel pole in, they have to tell us that reason and they can put a steel pole in.
Okay.
Substations, I promised, that's the end of the agreements. I promised I'd talk a little bit about substations at the end. So the commission said that they were authorizing transfer of the assets outside of the substations. And that's an important point. So a little bit of basic electricity for those of you. So there are generating plants where the electricity elves make electricity. At least that's what I believe. So the electricity elves make the electricity, and it's then transported over these big lines. If you go up to Long's Gardens, and you see that big line crossing Broadway, that is a transmission line. Those are high voltage lines. They have to be because they have to take power long distances, like superhighways. So then they go to what's called a substation, and there are 6 of those at issue here, but there's a substation. The substation takes it from that high voltage, which would kill you and probably ruin your microwave, and drop it down to a level that you can use, or at least can be moved along the distribution lines until it gets to another transformer that drops it down again. So that's the system. The substations are crucial. There are 6 of them at issue. The challenge is that the PUC does not have authority over transmission. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has authority over transmission. Because it's an interstate process. So the commission said, you guys work out what's going on in the substations. Xcel because one of the fundamentals of the law governing transmission in the United States is that.
FERC said you work it out.
No, the PUC said you work it out. Yeah, I'm sorry. The PUC, I apologize. The PUC said work it out. So we're trying. So one of the fundamental principles of transmission law in the United States is that transmission has to be provided in a non-discriminatory manner. You have to treat all of your customers the same. And so Xcel has what's called an open access transmission tariff, which they post with the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And in that, they have a process for a load system impact study. So where you can ask, well, this is the way we want to take transmission services from you. And so we have filed a request under that for design of the transferred substations. Xcel has provided draft reports to us on all 6 substations. 4 of them, out of the 6, they have agreed with what we have proposed. So 4 are off the table. We have 2 that we're still working on. So we have been meeting to discuss possibilities of changing this. There's a final report due October 3rd, draft due October 3rd, final due October 30th.
Just clarification. You said there are 6 substations at issue. Does that mean that there are 6 substations that we're talking about acquiring or replacing?
All are part of.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Not just the ones that are
Yeah.
edge cases for the non-municipal customers.
That's right.
Okay.
So there's 6. There's some in the city, there's some outside the city,
Right, okay.
but there are 6 that serve city customers where we'll have to use them one way or
That's
another.
the total that we're dealing with.
Yes, 6. So the next step, we'll do some detailed design and try to figure this out. We are looking at alternatives for the 2 that are that they have not agreed with us on. We're working on that. We intend to have construction costs for all of the substations, again, by May of 2020. The next steps, so council is going to consider these agreements on Thursday night. We will be filing with the Public Utilities Commission whatever we file on October 26th. The other parties will have 30 days to comment. And then if any of the parties request a hearing, it'll go to an administrative law judge, not to the commission. That's all I've got. Any more questions for me before I turn it over to Ben, who's waiting anxiously over there? Ben Irwin is going to talk about communications engagement. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got 2.
I just wanted to say 2 things. I
Yeah.
was really impressed with your 2 things that you said about the agreements, the legal arrangement that you made, the last one, and about the fact that we don't have to pay for them to,
That's
I
right.
really appreciate your
Thanks, Lynn.
going to that trouble. That's really important.
Thanks, Lynn. Donna, did you have a question?
Yeah, so there's just 2 things going on. There will be, there's a separation, the cost of separating the 2 systems into 2 systems. And then there's this condemnation thing of getting the assets,
Yes.
right? So I live in Gun Barrel. We have fear of being annexed. So.
Can I have your address so I can know where to annex? No, just kidding. Just kidding. We are not annexing Gun Barrel.
I know.
You
but-
know that, right?
Okay. But how does this work with the condemnation? Because if you condemn these, which you start doing in
Next year.
first quarter of 2019, if you condemn those substations around Gun Barrel, the ones that are in question, what happens? You condemn them and you own them, and yet Xcel needs those to give us electricity. So how is that all?
So there's an option to condemn part of them. There is no way, and you can write this down, there is no way the city can stop Xcel from providing you electricity out of the substations it uses. The whole process is designed to continue to allow them to provide electricity to its out-of-city customers, including you. And in fact, it's not, so you are served not just by one substation, but by more than one, because there always has to be a backup. And so that separated system, you see those long lines that went through there? They're there to provide you with that backup. So that's the goal. And so even if we own the part of the substation, and it's not clear that we will, that's one of the things we're working out, Xcel will continue to have adequate facilities to serve you. And in fact, one of our disputes is they want more than adequate facilities to serve you, at least we think. So we're working on that. Thank you. I'm sorry, one more question?
So are these 6 substations substantially the same assets, or do they vary in their capabilities? In other words, do some of them cost more than others?
Well, I mean, obviously, some cost more because they're located in valuable real estate. I mean, that's the biggest thing with substations. They're basically all fairly straightforward. I mean, you need an engineer to explain it, but you have big line, small line,
Yeah.
transformer.
Well, I can imagine they might have different capacity. I
Yeah.
didn't know if that varied a lot or.
It does.
basically,
It does.
And the changes that have to be made to the transmission system
Right.
are going to vary.
And exclusive of like real estate, what's the cost to create one of these subsystems? How much are we arguing about?
A lot. They're expensive.
$50 million or $5 million?
Varies between 7 and 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's actually relatively peanuts, the cost of a substation compared to the scale of this whole acquisition.
If you take out the siting challenges in Boulder,
Right.
which is a big deal. So, yeah, building another substation would be hard. We may have to do it, and those were costs we will tell you about. Thank you all for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. I want to thank you for your attention on a material that's really vitally important to the project, and which was this product of a lot of work and attention from staff and others. So thank you very much. My name is Ben Irwin. I'm the Deputy Director of Communication for the City of Boulder. Today is a big day for me because I learned a moment ago about the presence of electricity elves. So I'm excited. I learn something new about the project every day. I'm relatively new, and this was a big day for me. Seriously, though, I wanted to spend some time talking about, just to take a little bit more of your time to talk about some of our plans for communications and engagement on this project. And frankly, the caveat is you'll probably hear, as you learn more as we move forward in this project, you'll continue to hear a lot about communications and engagement. And so I kind of wanted to start by reintroducing or to most of you a little bit more about our process. In late 2017, we had the opportunity and heard a lot of feedback about the need to change and enter a new phase of engagement and communication for this project. And so at the recommendation of council, we formed a working group to really tackle this issue. Some of the members of the working group who worked on this plan are here today, and I want to just be the next person to thank them for their volunteering on that project. The intent of the working group was really to look at some of the methods that would apply to this particular project, to learn about the community more, and then figure out the methods and tactics and activities that we could do to improve our communications and engagement. That resulted in a report which we shared, which was delivered to the city manager and shared with city council in July of this year. And we got some additional feedback from council and used that in addition to what we learned from the working group to create a strategic communications and engagement plan, which we were able to present in an information packet to council in late August. And so what I want to do is just give you a little bit of background of the intent of the plan, and then give you a taste of some of the methods that we talked about in the working group, when we'd like to do some of those, and just give you a pretty high-level look at some of the things we have planned. So I'm going to just give you all of these at the same time. Sorry, Emily. But I want to go through high level and kind of in more simple terms what we want to try to accomplish for the goals of this project. And really, one of our key goals is to help ensure that people, when they go to vote in 2020 on this topic, that they feel as informed as possible about it. We really want to work very hard and use our communications tools and our engagement activities to try to raise awareness about this project, especially as it gets closer and closer to November 2020, and make sure that people who go in and make their decision do so with all the information that they need to feel good about making the decision. We seek diverse participation. We want to reach people we've never reached before, and we want to bring in as many different perspectives and experiences as possible. The working group was the first step in that. We tried to bring as many different perspectives and experiences there, and we hope that translates over the next few years. We really want to highlight that it's the community's role. It's their decision to make. It's all of our decision, really. It's a group project at this point. And ultimately, in November of 2020, the community will decide whether to move forward with electric utility development. One of the things we heard from a variety of sources is that we need to do a better job of balancing the vision for the project, what it could be, what the advantages that it could bring, versus the products of our work. the engineering planning, the costs that we're going to deliver, and the actual nuts and bolts of this project. So we want to balance that. And so we're going to endeavor to do an even better job of delineating when we're talking about what something we could happen versus what is actually happening with the project.
With respect to that,
Sure.
I hope this discussion was the last I ever hear about true-up costs.
That's out of my lane. We'll see if we can do something about that.
With that, what you're talking about is innovations that we can do outside of Xcel that are very broad.
Yeah, just do a better job of find different ways of letting people know when we're talking about something that's in the future or that we haven't quite figured out yet or we need community feedback on versus the things that we're actually doing that are at timeline of the project up until November 20, et cetera. And finally, just understanding this project in the context of everything else that we're doing. It's a very large project, significant city task and project, but it's one of many things we're doing to meet our climate commitment. And then finally, we want to look back at this and see that it was a shared learning experience and it involved a lot of community dialogue. I'm going to share guiding principles as well with the full knowledge. This is somewhat similar to what you just saw, but it's very important to us. And it was one of the key things that the working group one of the key things that came out of the working group. We want to be able to, and I'm sharing it because we want to be held accountable to this. We want our activities, the events that we hold moving forward, the communications materials that we share to meet, whenever possible, meet these guiding principles, and we expect to be held accountable for them. But you can see things like inclusive and equitable. We're going to redouble our efforts to provide bilingual materials and provide information in as many different ways as possible. We want to be transparent. We want to be able to share all of our work and also be able to let you know when we don't know something and what our process is to finding the answer, what the timeline will be. We want it to be substantive. We want to respect your time and attention. And so we're going to do everything we can to create and deliver information that's useful to you in making that decision and knowing more about the project. Accessible. We want to deliver in a variety of different ways this information. And we want it to be people to be able to decide what level of detail they want and more easily navigate the information we're sharing. Some people will just want a high level. Other people will really want to dig in. And so we want to make those avenues clearer. We want to be more visual. We want to use video more in helping to tell the story of this project and help people make a decision. And then ultimately, a recurring theme, community-centered. We want to create experiences and create materials that are really driven by community input and engagement. So the last thing I wanted to share with you is just sort of a high level of what you can expect through 2020 in this project. Right now, we're just kicking off. We turned in our plan, the first version of our plan, I'd say. It's a living document. We'll continue to evaluate it and grow it. But we turned it in, and now we're seeking to sort of get that started. And the one thing so you can see through 2018 on the left, one thing I really wanted to highlight is the engagement guide. If it's not there now, it will be later today or early tomorrow. The plan is available online. It's a pretty dry document. It's an internal document largely. It's something to help guide our work and something for us to measure our progress. But we also wanted to have a more public-facing engagement guide so that near the beginning of this next phase, you have a better sense of all of the different opportunities to interact with the project. And so it's not sort of just coming up on the horizon, but you can sort of plan and see some of the topics and engagement opportunities we have and how it all fits together. In 2019, we're really focused on awareness building and activating the community through a variety of different types of engagement events to stimulate conversation. Some will be very, very much focused on local utility development, but some will be about other issues that are really important to our energy future and may involve the utility, or likely would involve the utility, but might involve other things happening in the city as well. I would highlight the video piece there in the quarterly updates like this one. Moving forward, we'll endeavor to either record the video and make it available online or potentially stream it if certain types of updates would be more suited for that or better suited for that. And we intend to create a series of different types of videos to help explain the project and help explain what we're learning. And then finally, in 2020, we're really going to focus, this kind of echoes what Steve said and what Tom said. We're going to focus in 2020 on preparing people, taking what we've learned and all this work that staff has done, and Emily and myself and Sarah Huntley, who's the engagement manager, and a host of other staff are going to try to take that material and translate it a little bit so that it's accessible for people who might just be entering this process. In 2020, there'll be a lot of people just really thinking about this for the first time as they have to consider how they're going to vote. So we're going to be working to try to take all this good work and provide it in different ways for different levels of interest and attention so that we can give people as much information as possible for their vote. And then we did include evaluation. I think it's important to note we're trying some new things, so we're going to be, almost every event moving forward, there'll be some evaluation piece to it so that we can continue to tweak our plan as we move forward. But at the end, after we've reached sort of this big push of awareness and building knowledge for voters, we want to take a look at what was successful and what wasn't. We think we can learn a lot about other types of city communication and engagement from what we're doing here. So, yes?
Just curious about the speaker series. One of the things that concerns me is in the past, where I've seen the speaker series has been a little more than propaganda events. Sometimes the speakers were part of what we call them political action groups. Some of the people had arrest records. And I'm just curious what sort of vetting you're going to be doing so that when someone speaks, I remember one event I was at, and Heather Bailey was so embarrassed about the person who was up front speaking. What sort of vetting processes are you going to do to make sure that the people that are speaking are really qualified speakers, they don't have arrest records
Right.
because of extreme environmental views
Right.
or other things? What are you going to do so it's cleaner than it used to be in the
Yeah.
past?
So the question, just for the folks that might be listening to the recording, is how are we going to select speakers for a speaker series, for example, and make sure that they're qualified and provide sort of a balanced view, I guess you would say, to the project.
And you know, they don't have criminal records.
Okay.
That's important.
Right. So that they're appropriate for the setting, and they're appropriate for this project. And we don't have a specific process in place yet. We're still developing some of those topics. So we haven't really contended with that. But the intent here is to try to provide as balanced and transparent and useful information as possible. And so I would have to say that when we have that process, it's going to be a vetting process that allows for very qualified speakers to be here and really striving for balance. So I know that's not part of your question, but we want to try to have topics and speaker series that try to look at this project from different angles. Patrick?
And then, as you know, I was part of the group.
Yep.
It was a great group. It was really diverse. I just love the people. But to kind of put a finer point on the propaganda topic, I foresee that all of this is going to be muni supportive and not muni evaluative, not putting critical review on the muni, just putting ribbons and bows and glitter on the muni.
Right.
Are you honestly going to provide point counterpoint on some of these muni topics on the blog, in the speakers, in the videos?
Well, what we've talked about is having a venue for a variety of different perspectives to be shared. Part of what we're doing is supporting the mandate that we have, or the direction that we have, to explore this and develop a utility and get this information. So there's a big part of what we're doing to try to disseminate the information that staff produces, doing the engineering work, doing the cost agreements, doing the cost assessments and the legal work. So, but we have made a strong commitment, I feel, to creating balance and transparency in this process. And every effort will be made to represent different perspectives. It's a real commitment that we have.
Well, when you say different perspectives, do you really mean pro and against municipalization, or do you just mean different perspectives as in different approaches to solving the municipalization problem?
I think it's yes and. The local utility municipalization is part of Boulder's energy future, and so there's a lot of different components, and so there's opportunities to talk about some of those other components as it relates to this project. And so some of the engagement can support municipalization, or can support the efforts of staff, I should say, while also incorporating other perspectives on how to reach our goals. One of the things we talked about is there's a lot of ideas about how, one of the great things about Boulder is that most people agree with the goals in terms of we should, they agree with the tenets of the climate commitment, but how we get there is the thing that we can discuss. And what we want to have is have venues where that journey can be discussed fully. So, yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to say, in behalf of Ben, who's only been in the city for, I don't know how many months.
I've been with this project for about 6 months now, actually 9 months, but I've been with the city 3.
Just the speaker series that have occurred since about 2006 were in many cases not hosted by the city. So it might have looked like the city was putting on a pro-muni speaker series, but many of those events were hosted by other groups and nonprofits.
Really.
I wanted to bring up, I'd love to have public debate. I think there's a lot, like, for instance, Build the Oreos piece in the Sunday Paper. I'd love to have a direct interaction with him, with the people that understand this. I think a lot of times there's just misunderstandings, miscommunications. That's where, you know, that's your profession. And I think the way you hash that out sometimes is by putting the forum there to debate it, and then maybe even bringing these guys onto the side of the meeting at some point.
Well, you know, honestly,
That's
to,
ultimately,
to respond, the city attorney said, and Steve said as well, we're going to work as hard as we can to bring as much information to the table in early 2020, so
Yeah.
there can be.
and,
People can contend with the work and make a choice.
and the other thing I wanted to bring up is, I don't use these social medias, Instagram, or tweets, or what have you, but anything to bring people on early in 2019, so that there's an interest buildup
Right.
for 2020.
Yeah.
That's all that-
We're focused on capacity building and making sure that,
And that could be any age.
Right.
I don't think that, like, there are plenty of people in my generation that use these things that I don't, so.
Right.
It's not necessarily just for the younger generation.
great.
I had a question for Catanach. So.
Okay, we got a couple other hands up, and then we can turn it over to Steve. Question?
Trying to formulate a comment on the Let's Talk sessions. Former Mayor Susan Osborne had very effective roundtable meetings,
Okay.
going back to 2010. And I thought that was
I'll look forward to learning more about that. One of the advantages we have is that Sarah Huntley is still very engaged with this project as engagement manager. And so she brings some of that institutional knowledge as well as a lot of the staff that's on the project team. So, and all of you. So thank you for that.
Under your guiding principles, inclusive and equitable and transparent, I would want a really strong emphasis on those in unincorporated Boulder County. Because for instance, today, at the Boulder County Planning Commission, there was a meeting for proposed amendments to the Boulder County Land Use Code related to solar energy systems. If you look at the old map, there's very little land in which they can have like 500 kilowatt, which is like 1,800 solar panels or more, and now it's all over the map, including the Twin Lakes fields right next to my house can have 500 watt or more, according to this new map. And lots of times when you live in unincorporated, you feel like you're getting the impact for what the city is doing. In affordable housing and in the muni. Are they gonna put all the windmills and all the solar panels on East County, all the density in East County, and protect the foothills and stuff?
So-
I mean, these people are the ones who are
Right.
getting electricity from this, and yet we may be getting impact, so that's a huge thing.
All I can say is that we will advertise these opportunities broadly and welcome whoever
Right.
wants to come and have a
But I
conversation.
think you need to let the citizens know, like if you're going to, and I'm all for the renewable energy, but I want it to be an honest, open thing on where are the solar panels going, where are the windmills going, and where is the impact of this? And not like, because I'm telling you, when we live in East Boulder County, we're just the second cousin that they don't care about. And they're protecting the views on the western end. So that's very important to me, very important.
we hope to have all of our materials represent that, especially, yeah, definitely look at the engagement guide, and we'll look forward to additional feedback on that, because we want everyone to feel like they've had an opportunity to participate. Some questions for Steve? Or at least one question for Steve?
Yeah, I think one thing was gone into is the trade-offs that happen with some, rooftops and, maybe the extra cost of that, so that the whole community can understand those things, as we're developing our resources for solar. What I wanted to ask you about was, Nils's proposal in some form. I know it's maybe proprietary, but I'd like to have some idea about it.
I'm sure Nils would be more than happy to visit with you about what he's doing. It's an interesting concept having to do with electrification of vehicles.
Can you be any more specific?
I'm sure Nils can.
I'd like that to be on the public record.
Yep.
I don't want to take up the time of the city, but the idea is that electric vehicles have swappable batteries.
Stoppable.
Swappable.
Oh, battery swappable.
There
Oh,
will
Yep.
be free energy storage
oh,
for the
right.
utility after a certain amount of years, and that storage will grow.
Great. And I'm sure you'd be happy to provide Lynn with more detail. Steve?
Real quick, on one of the bulleted slides, you mentioned the power supply and resource planning. Can you say more on that, or point me in the direction where I can get more information?
As far as Xcel's current,
The city's, you mentioned, the various tasks and whatever you were working on the power supply
Oh.
and resource planning. And since I worked in the resource end for many, many years, I'm just curious if maybe you can say more about it, or maybe you can point me in the direction to see what the city's doing.
yeah, requests for indicative pricing should be available on our purchasing website where it can be downloaded. I believe it's still there. If not, I'd be happy to get you a copy of that. What we tried to develop in that RFIP, request for indicative pricing, was an opportunity for some of these energy suppliers to really propose to us innovative, unique solutions, while yet clearly defining what the City of Boulder's energy requirements are going to be. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the responses we get.
So right now you're waiting to see what sort of proposals the suppliers are gonna give you,
Right.
and then you'll determine if they're realistic or not.
And some of them, I'm sure, we were asked today for one of the responders for us to enter into an NDA for some of the information they'll be providing us, which is actually encouraging because they're really opening up their business to us, but we don't want to undermine their competitiveness either. Yes, sir.
Is there a possibility that during this process in the next couple of years that some of the generation assets that would be subject to stranded cost recovery may be retired and fall away from the balance sheet for what we might be on the hook for?
And I don't know if,
Specifically Comanche.
Yeah, to the extent that those are retired, the entire Xcel service territory will be paying the stranded costs for those. Just like with Clean Air, Clean Jobs, when that was passed, you may notice on your bill now, there's a little CACJ, it's not very much, but
Right.
everybody pays that, and it's the paying down of the value of those assets that were retired earlier.
So, for instance, Comanche down in Pueblo, that's going to be subject to line item charge for, okay.
Yep.
So they're not just not tossing that in the dustbin.
no.
No.
And other assets they have may retire. I'm not familiar with their retirement schedule, but if something was naturally retired, there wouldn't be that risk. Yes,
Are there
sir.
any targets for the amount of electricity to be generated locally?
We have a 100 megawatt goal that the city has established by 2030. And currently, I believe we have about 40 megawatts of local generation on the city system. That's a combination of some of the hydro plants that the city owns and the distributed solar that's within the community. I'm hoping that's the right number.
So with projected increases in energy efficiency, especially with buildings and whatever other industrial processes might be going on here in the city, what percentage of the total electricity do you think that 100 megawatts will be?
That's a little bit more than a third
And
of our peak, of our coincident peak demand. Yeah.
How about storage? Is that part of the equation?
It is certainly one of the elements we've asked for in this request for indicative pricing is storage solutions to be included as part of the solution.
Did you say our consumption now is 100 megawatts, is that peak or what?
No, the 100 megawatts would be local generation. That's a goal the city has established for 2030. The overall city peak demand, that's about a third, a little bit more than a third of the overall city peak demand, coincident peak demand.
And for demand side management, how much closer to the base electricity generation level do you think you can get the peak?
That's a good question that I don't have an answer for right now. Patrick?
Yeah, am I correct that as Xcel adds new renewable resources like the Rush wind project, that also will be part of the stranded costs? In other words, they're building these things, we're gonna have a percentage cost in all the new wonderful things they do, as well as shutting down the coal plants.
That's yet to be determined.
Yeah, as Tom says, that's yet to be determined.
But we got better plans. What-
Lynn, this gentleman, then Lynn? Please.
Do you think that the response to your RFIP are going to be probably like the same players that are responding to Xcel's most current RFPs?
We hope they are. Yeah.
So we might be able to get like a little peek under the covers by looking at those numbers to see what might be coming back for our own RFP.
We certainly seen those numbers.
We have seen those.
Yeah, we're interveners in that case, so we've been able to see that. But part of our,
Those numbers look pretty awesome.
yeah, part of our strategy and the timing of releasing our request was kind of on the coattails of Xcel's 120-day report, because that, a lot of people have already done the work fundamentally, because we were afraid they wouldn't devote that much effort for Boulder.
So we could kind of do some mental projection based on what we saw from, the responses to Xcel.
Yep. Lynn?
Have you included, broadband, and I don't know if you have Tim Shepley's latest production, including broadband with the municipal electric and the values of storage, solar plus storage, home automated systems, transactive energy between sections of microgrids. And then Paul Danish just wrote a piece in the paper, and I seldomly agree with Paul Danish, but lately, especially the last few years, about solid state batteries that will increase the range potentially of our vehicles to 700 miles and much faster charging apparatus and a whole huge panacea of things. I don't know how realistic it is, but it sounded encouraging. And another piece to the puzzle as we're moving along and as things are changing dramatically, and if these things can be incorporated into this discussion.
So as Ben was talking about, there are the hard numbers, there's the work we're doing to inform the voters, but there's also that visionary portion. And when we start talking about, transactive energy and all the exciting things that are coming along in the electric utility industry, and there's lots of opportunity, that's really that vision that we want to talk about as well.
And time of use pricing that Boulder.
Yep, Fort Collins is moving to that.
Pricing redux.
There's the electric utility industry is very dynamic now. There's a lot of very forward-thinking. It's all part of what we're considering as we look to the future and what those impacts are. But that is more difficult to value, and our intent is for the 2020 vote to help the community understand that value and the costs and the benefits associated with this.
Steve, I'm going to just jump in. I think that's about all the time we have.
Okay.
So just want to thank everyone for coming.
I just got the hook.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks everyone for coming and for your questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.